Hi everyone, it's Rachael here and welcome to another episode of the Ditch the Diet podcast. I have an absolutely brilliant episode as always for you coming up today, but before we get into that, I just wanted to say welcome to our new listeners. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, please don't forget to subscribe, and if you're a long-term listener, welcome back. It's lovely to see you again. Well, not to see you, but you know what I mean. Thank you for returning for another episode. If you enjoy the podcast, please could you leave me a little review on Apple Podcasts just by scrolling down on your device, hitting the little 5-star button, and just leave me a couple of sentences in the comments. That would be so good. Thank you very much for that. So today's episode is a belter. I am welcoming leading dietitian Sophie Medlin, who works in London with an expertise in gastrointestinal and colorectal health. Sophie is also a lecturer and a researcher at King's College London, and is an excellent source of a vast array of information when it comes to evidence-based nutrition. Sophie also regularly features in all sorts of social media, radio and television as well. One of Sophie's specialist subjects is irritable bowel syndrome and digestive disorders, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and we're also going to talk about the effects on what you eat and the effects of long-term yo-yo dieting on your overall health. We also get into some diet myth-busting topics as well, and go off on a few tangents, because we all know that I like to go off on a few tangents. So welcome, Sophie, and thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Listeners, I hope you enjoy this episode. I really enjoyed recording it. I will be back at the end to tell you how you can find out more about what Sophie does and more about the Academy. I'll see you then. So I thought it would be the best place to start would be just to get a bit of information about you and for the listeners, so that they know who we're talking to before we get into the nitty gritty. So can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Sophie Medlin. I am a dietitian. I've been a dietitian since a long time before it was fashionable to work in nutrition. I qualified in 2007, and I spent about 6 or 7 years in the NHS, where I specialised in colorectal disorders. So looking after people with any kind of bowel disorders, but specifically my area of research and expertise is looking after people who've had gastrointestinal surgery. Mm-hmm. So the nutritional consequences of gastrointestinal surgery. From there, I went on to lecture and research in nutrition and dietetics. I did that for 5 years. And this year, I quit my job and I'm now working for myself. So I'm a consultant dietitian. I consult for companies and also individuals in clinics and do some media work and things like that.
Fab. Are you still focused on colorectal surgery recovery, or do you work with a wider range of people now?
Yeah, I do all sorts of things. So I do, IBS is a big part of my business in terms of clinical consultations, and I love working with people with any bowel condition, but IBS is such a treat because you can make such a difference, and that's so lovely. So taking people from struggling with, not even being able to use public transport and things like that, to being able to live a normal and healthy life and get to work every day is just, it's so rewarding as a dietitian to be able to offer people that kind of, relief from symptoms, which is lovely.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention public transport there, because I have had IBS since I was 19. I'm nearly 35 now, and back when my symptoms were really bad, public transport was like one of the biggest issues for me. It's funny that you started with saying that, because I thought, oh God, yeah, that used to be me.
It's such a fear for people, and it creates so many barriers to you being able to do nice things and have a nice life, especially if you don't drive. It's difficult. So in London, it's particularly problematic for people. But also I see lots of weight management, which I enjoy as well. And, we were talking before about how weight management is so much more about, yourself and your self-esteem and how you feel about things and your, the emotional side of eating, rather than knowing what to put in your mouth. And so a lot of the work that I do is healing people's relationship with food and working with them to make positive changes for their whole life, as opposed to just saying, here's your diet prescription, off you go, which, as you know, just never works.
Yeah, I think this is totally going off on a tangent here, but when I first started learning about nutrition and things back 10 years ago, I sort of was quite naive at the time. I was a personal trainer and I thought, I can just tell people what to eat and how to exercise, and off they'll go and they'll do exactly what I told them to do, and they'll come back in 3 months' time and they will just feel like a new person. But it's just not like that at all. There's so much more to it. And I think in this, 10 years later, I started training when I was 10 years ago, working in this sort of the fitness industry to begin with. And I think in those 10 years, like, diet culture has changed so much now. And 10 years ago, we didn't really have Facebook, we didn't have Instagram, we didn't have social media. And back then it was the big sort of diet culture was, if you wanted to lose weight, you went to a slimming club, or you bought a Rosemary Connolly DVD and you just got on with it. And nowadays we've got so much more information, and the access to information is so huge. And I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with, that are podcast listeners and people that I come across on a day-to-day basis, are that it's like there's so much stuff. Like, where do we start? Who do we believe? And, what is the right thing to do? What is the wrong thing to do? What are your thoughts on diet culture in the world that we're living in nowadays? Do you see that it contributes to illnesses that you're seeing in clinic?
Absolutely. So it massively affects people in terms of disordered eating. Again, as you say, people just don't know who to believe or what to believe. I get people coming to clinic who are afraid to eat fruit because of what they've read online. And I just, I also saw yesterday that, I don't know if I can say this, but Amber Rose is promoting skinny tea during pregnancy. During pregnancy. Goodness. Are you mad? We can't even people aren't even allowed to take any. So there's so many prescription drugs that we're not sure are safe during pregnancy, but some tea that you buy on Instagram, take that when you're pregnant.
It's worrying, isn't it?
So scary. The diet industry, diet culture is scary. One thing that's really important for people to remember about the diet industry is that whatever diet you pick up is always a calorie deficit dressed up as something else. So it's a calorie deficit with a marketing plan. And that's all it is. And you don't need to follow any special diet if you want to lose weight. You don't need to do anything that affects your social life or impacts on your mental health or any of those things. You just need to find the strength and the commitment to move a bit more, whether that's walking or whatever, and to manage what you're eating and understand the reasons why you're eating it. Most importantly, understand if you're eating cake as you're with your friends and you're having a nice time and you're celebrating, that's lovely. If you're eating cake because you're sad and you're on your own, same calories, same food, different connotation, different meaning, and different reason to address it.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit about IBS today, because I'm interested in that. But I go off on tangents all the time. I know this is the first time we've spoken, but you'll find that I go off on one sometimes. But I like to get other people's opinions of these things. When you were talking about the skinny teas, I see things like this sort of doing the rounds. Like you see them loads, and then they seem to go off somewhere, and then the cycle continues and they come back. And another thing that I saw when you said about people not prescribing but selling these things to populations that probably shouldn't even be considering these things, another thing that I have seen coming back over the past few weeks is the promotion of little capsules with dried fruits and vegetables in them to children in order to get parents to be able to get their children to eat more fruits and I use that word very, very loosely, fruits and vegetables. And I have quite a strong opposition to this, because I would prefer, obviously I know that kids can be very fussy and it can be very difficult to get them to eat fruits and vegetables, but I would prefer them to be introduced in a way that's proactive to actually showing them what a fruit and a vegetable looks like, rather than them growing up thinking that fruits and vegetables come in capsules. But from a dietitian's point of view, what are your thoughts on powdered fruits and vegetables as a way of getting nutrients into your body? I mean, in capsules, ethically or
well, I think in nutrition, there's often these nice places where there is a sort of philosophical question: and a nutritional question. And sometimes those two things are slightly different, which is a nice thing. But I think in this instance, there's both ends of the thing are an issue. So the amount of valuable nutrients you could realistically get in capsule form is incredibly low. So I work in the supplement industry, and often there might be, I don't know, a nice botanical that we might like to get into a capsule. But the amount you need for it to be effective and to have any kind of impact on the body would be so high that putting it in a capsule just doesn't work. So the thought that you could, freeze dry and powder down some fruit and vegetables and put them in capsule is just nonsense. You would get nothing of any significant value at all. You'd be better having that battle over whether they eat a piece of carrot or not at the dinner table.
Totally, I would definitely rather that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you're wasting your money. You're teaching your children that, goodness comes in capsules, and you don't need to put, you don't waste your money wasting your money in the pharmacy is much worse. You need to put your money in the vegetable aisle, and that's where it should all be.
Yeah. I'm so glad. It's so nice to hear someone from a professional point of view having a similar outlook.
I mean, when we work as dietitians, when we work with children, say with autism spectrum disorders, for example, who really won't eat anything apart from beige food, they often have very, very restricted eating. We would get them on a good quality A to Z multivitamin to cover their bases. And that's the best kind of evidence-based thing you can do. If you're really fighting with your kids, get them on some good quality vitamins, not vitamins you buy online, not vitamins that have freeze-dried vegetables and things in them, just, a good quality brand, even if it's Boots' own. And you get the vitamins, and your children will get the vitamins and minerals that they might be missing from their diet.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And with our thoughts on the current diet culture in not only the UK, but I suppose worldwide, there are lots of people that listen to this podcast in Australia as well, actually. Are there any trends that you're noticing with regards to how we are eating as a general population and the illnesses that you are seeing in your clinic, sort of lifestyle-based illnesses, I suppose?
Yeah, so we certainly see a lot more anemia and B12 deficiency as a result of the trend towards plant-based diets. I never thought I would end up seeing so much of that in young people. People are struggling with things like brain fog and loss of energy, and and things like hair loss as well, problems with their skin. And often the last thing they will consider is that it might be their plant-based diet, because it's just sold as being, the solution to everything. And
it really is,
actually you're really, the idea that cutting out whole food groups doesn't have nutritional consequences is absolute nonsense and needs to be, we need to talk about that more openly. I've had some really difficult interactions with the vegan community online as a result of sort of saying some of these things, but I think they're really important messages to get across to people. So there's that. There's certainly a massive rise in orthorexia, which I'm sure you will have spoken about at some point on the podcast. Problems with people obsessing with healthy eating and struggling to get away from those beliefs that, some foods are good and some foods are bad, and having very strict regulations around food. Similarly with exercise and rules around exercise and what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, as opposed to kind of finding some movement that brings them joy, which is the way that I always try to get people to get back to things.
Same here.
Certainly IBS is on the rise, and bowel problems are massively increasing, and I think that's because of we'll probably come on to this, but I think that's probably because of our kind of urban lifestyles and the impact that has on gut microflora.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating. As someone that's suffered with IBS for like the vast majority of my adult life, really on and off, I find it really fascinating looking back from when I was originally diagnosed in my late teens. The advice that I was given then by the consultant that I saw at the time, and the advice that I've been given over the past 15 years as it's gone along to the advice that's been given now. Even I am, and I would say I'm relatively well informed, even I am confused at the moment, to be honest with you. Because the people that I work with that are searching for the perfect diet, I suppose I am still searching for that answer to the issues that I have with IBS, and it seems to be quite a common diagnosis these days, and it's like you say, it's getting more and more prevalent in the world that we live in today. So before we even dive into that, what exactly is IBS, And how is it diagnosed?
IBS is one of those disorders that's diagnosed by ruling out everything else. And one of the things that I think people are not very well informed about is that there are strict guidelines about what your GP should have tested you for. So your general practitioner in this country, family doctor, should have tested you for before they tell you you've got IBS. So there's nice guidelines on that in the UK, but what we generally use is called the Rome criteria. And the Rome criteria essentially says we have to rule out anything that might be dangerous. So things like colitis, Crohn's disease, things like celiac disease, so wheat allergy, things like, and if you've got any blood in your stool or anything like that, bowel cancer, we want to rule out. And that's, those things are really uncommon and really rare, but it's really important that you don't get misdiagnosed with IBS when actually it's something more serious. Once all of those things have been eliminated, that's when your GP should be thinking, okay, it's probably IBS. Unfortunately, very often I see patients come to my clinic who've been told they've got IBS, and actually when we do a bit more exploring, it sounds like they've got something that needs more exploration and or that hasn't been ruled out effectively. So we often end up writing back to people's GPs, for example, or writing to people's GPs and saying, actually, I think you need to do this and this and this before you can tell this person they've got IBS. And often those people have been back to their GPs repeatedly with these problems and not taken very seriously, which is a real shame.
I've always wondered if my extreme dieting behaviours in my early 20s may have contributed to quite how bad my IBS got. I would say, I think orthorexia has probably taken it a little bit too far for me, but I had extreme diet behaviours where I would cut out entire food groups for short periods of time, like carbs or trying to cut out sugar and or even fruit. Like when you said right at the beginning about being scared of fruit, I was like, oh my God, that used to be me when I was a lot younger. Do you think extreme dieting or even yo-yo dieting can contribute to IBS in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So IBS symptoms tend to be bloating, wind, things like diarrhea and constipation. I do see quite a lot of constipation caused by IBS, which is more difficult to treat in some ways, but the results are brilliant. What we know about IBS is that there's a big contributory that our gut flora, the bacteria that live in our colon, have a big impact on the symptoms and what's going on. And the reason we know that is because when we manipulate them with our diets, we see a massive impact on the symptoms. So yes is the answer. Your gut microflora, there's loads of different friends in there that do all kinds of important jobs for your body. And they all feed on different things, and we don't know the exact right prescription for them. We don't know what the exact right profile even looks like for or the perfect profile looks like for your gut bacteria. But what we do know is that the healthiest people have the broadest range of population, so the most variety of gut bacteria when we look at them in the labs. And those people eat a very wide diet. They might eat all kinds of different types of carbohydrates. They'll eat all kinds of different fruits and vegetables on a daily basis. So really, really varied diet feeds the broadest spectrum of bacteria. And for that reason, when we cut out food groups, we're therefore not feeding all of our friends, and some of them get starved. And that disruption to the gut bacteria population can certainly have an impact on people's long-term and short-term gut health.
One of the big sort of words that is circulating around on social media a lot at the moment is the low FODMAP diet. This was something that I was put on when I was younger. My timeline is ridiculous because I still think I'm 22 most of the time. But I was put on a low FODMAP diet a long time ago. I think it must have been just sort of when it was emerging, I suppose. And I was given a sheet of paper with a list of foods that I could eat and a list of foods that I had not to eat. Yeah. And I was left to my own devices, and it was only years later that I realised that there are multiple stages of the low FODMAP diet. So I literally was on a low FODMAP diet for about 3 or 4 years.
Oh dear, that's
a disaster. And only now when I look back, I think, oh my goodness, I've actually not, although my symptoms were a little bit less in the short term, in the long term, I feel like I did myself more harm than good. What about a low FODMAP diet that is properly executed? What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm hearing mixed messages. I'm hearing, some dietitians are saying this is like the be all and end all for IBS, and then at the other end of the scale, I have people tell me that absolutely not, not even for the 4-week elimination. What are your thoughts on that?
It's super effective. It makes a massive difference to people's symptoms if it's done properly. And the way that you do that with support is to look at what someone eats normally and help them to understand how to implement it. So you're not saying, here's a whole list of things you can't eat. Oh, and it's all the food that you normally eat. You support somebody to help to implement that. But what we do also know about the low FODMAP diet is that it does disrupt your gut bacteria. So some of the gut bacteria that cause your symptoms, so things like bloating and wind, those bacteria are actually some of the friendly bacteria that do important other jobs in our bodies. And the low FODMAP diet does starve them, does reduce how much, their quantities and their populations, which is a shame. We were kind of, one of the lovely things about the low FODMAP diet is that it gave us a treatment option. Before that, we couldn't really massively help people with IBS through diet. But again, really important that we reintroduce, really important that we go through redressing that gut bacteria population once you've figured out which is really triggering your symptoms, what food you can essentially replace them with to make sure that you're feeding all of your friends in your colon and you're not just starving some of the populations, because long term that's not going to be good for you. What's important to note is that actually we don't have massive data on the long-term implications or consequences of the low FODMAP diet. So it's important that we go through all of the other aspects of IBS, like behavioural problems, psychological issues, stress, all of those things, because actually another thing that we know about IBS is that the symptoms that you experience as someone with IBS may be no different when we look on an MRI scan. So, for example, when we look on MRI scans, we can see that the distension, the kind of blowing up of the colon in someone with IBS might look exactly the same as someone without IBS. But the person with IBS experiences that very differently to the person without IBS. So it's not necessarily that those foods have a massive impact on you. And for some people, it certainly is. And, you can see some brilliant results with cutting out certain foods for some people. But for a lot of people, actually, those symptoms, it's just that you experience them very differently, or you experience the bloating or the distension of the colon very differently to somebody who doesn't have IBS. So what's going on in your body isn't necessarily massively different to other people. It's just that it affects you in a different way.
Is that to do with sort of being hypersensitive to the way that it feels?
So it certainly can be. And we know that people with IBS have this hypersensitivity to the distension of the colon, which happens as a normal process of digestion. We don't necessarily know why, and we don't necessarily know if that's something that, certainly from my experience of working with patients with colorectal disorders, the more you think about these things, the more you worry about your poo, the worse things tend to get.
Yeah.
You stress about feeling bloated, the more you notice bloating and things like that. So it's important to remember that sometimes we do become sort of hypervigilant or hyper aware of what's going on in our bowel, and that then will make you hypersensitive to things. And that's where a really good clinician can sit down with you and talk you through some of those things and talk about what's normal and what's a normal thing to experience and what's we can manage and things like that. And that's where giving someone a list of do's and don'ts and sending them on their way for 3 years or 5 years is really
well, I'm hoping that doesn't actually happen these days, but
it does.
Does it? Yeah,
and not just because partly in this kind of in the UK, because the National Health Service is so strapped for cash, that if someone comes and they have good relief from a low FODMAP diet, it might be that they don't want to come back for their appointment to follow up, and we might not have the availability to be able to sort of chase them and say you must come back. And lots of trusts are doing good work in trying to improve that, but it is difficult. If someone gets lost to follow up, they are, the chances of an NHS hospital being able to find them and track them down is limited.
That's true. And what about the connection between IBS and what goes on in your brain? So mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, is that a two-way street? Can one cause the other, or the other cause the other, or is there a connection there as well?
So it's what we call the gut-brain axis, and we're learning loads about this at the moment. It's a very, very important part of our dietary research and nutritional research at the moment. What we know is that people who have mental health disorders, so things like anxiety and depression, have differences in their gut microflora, so the bacteria in their colon, compared to people who don't have depression and anxiety. And that doesn't mean, and we don't know which, so there's a causal effect that we don't know if that's a causal effect, is what I'm trying to say. So essentially, we don't know if the gut bacteria changes drives the mental health problems, or whether the mental health problems drive the changes in colonic microflora, but it's almost certainly a two-way street. So I know from a personal perspective, and I'm sure everyone listening can understand, that when you are very stressed or when you're very anxious, you tend not to eat in a particularly healthful way. So we tend to end up grabbing sandwiches on the go, or grabbing food from somewhere, or getting a takeaway instead of cooking for ourselves because we're busy and we're stressed. And then those things can then have a long-term contributory impact on our gut microflora, which can then make changes and sort of perpetuate the problem potentially.
Yeah, that. I find that really fascinating, that area of research at the moment. It's really interesting.
So so just to explain a little bit more, those gut bacteria that are really important for these things, they release sort of special chemicals that talk to your brain. So gut bacteria that we know are really healthy and important, they then release chemical signals when they're being fed, when they're digesting our food, that travel through our gut and into our brain, and release signals into our brain that tell our bodies to do different things, and also tell our brains to think different things. And it's really amazing.
What you eat, the food that you put into your body, really does have such an incredibly profound effect on, like, even the way that you think and the way that you feel. It's just fascinating. Because I could talk about that all day.
Yeah, me too. Do you feel that when you were yo-yo dieting, you maybe, how did you feel about, so one of the things that I think is really interesting to observe is that when people are the leanest, they are the least happy. Oh, yeah. So it might be that you're very thin, and so at the moment, if people are struggling with their weight, they might be thinking, if I was just thinner, I would be happier. But what I observe, and what I know from myself, and what I know from my peers, and what I know from my clinics, is that very often when people are the thinnest in their life, they're actually the least happy. And I wonder how much of that is to do with what you've starved in order to get to the place that you are in. But also, you are so focused on being as thin as you can be. What does that say about, the quality of your life in other areas?
I would say that's accurate for me as well. I went through a period of time not even that long ago, it was probably about 3 years ago, where I lost around 10 kilos really, really quickly, like in the space of like 2 or 3 months, which is really far too quickly. And I was really, really, I think I was underweight, and I was so focused on cutting things out, and it was more like reducing the amount of food that I ate rather than reducing the variety. But that drop in my body weight had such a massive effect on, like, my IBS came back after years and years of not having many symptoms at all. I didn't feel that happiness that I thought I would feel when I got to that specific weight, and I probably roughly kept around 6 or 7 of those kilos off, because I did have a bit of weight to lose. But and nowadays, like, I don't count a single thing. I don't weigh food like I used to. I don't count calories. I don't do anything at all like that, and it's such a relief. And lo and behold, I haven't put any weight on. And like I can enjoy life now, and like that's what I want to get people. I would love to get people to that point where they feel that they can go out on the weekend and, still go out for tea and cake with their friends, and not have to like bury their heads when they get home for 2 days feeling guilty about it. And if I could just wave a magic wand over everyone and have that happen overnight, it would be great.
I think that, there's again the diet industry issue there, in that half an avocado probably has the same amount of calories as a piece of cake, but somehow the avocado is evil and the cake is evil and the avocado is the angel.
I know, and we can only just keep spreading the word. What sort of, if anyone is I guess let's split this into 2 sections, seeing as we're kind of talking a little bit about diet and a little bit about IBS. Let's talk about IBS first of all. If anyone, is there anything that people could do sort of in their own time at home, if they are struggling with IBS, if they've been diagnosed and they sort of been in a position where I was sort of given a sheet of paper and told to Google it and learn how to live with it. I think that was the exact words I was told when I was 19.
Please tell me that was by a doctor and not by a dietitian.
GP, my GP. And then I was referred to a consultant who told me to eat bran flakes for breakfast and lots of fibre. And that was it really. She really liked printing off pieces of paper, like sheets of paper with lists of foods that I could eat and lists of foods that I couldn't eat. But you trust people, don't you? Like, especially when you're 18, 19 years old, and like my mum and dad would come with me, and you trust people.
And you've finally got that appointment that you've been waiting however long for with a doctor, and you think you're going to get a solution to a problem that's, actually really impacts on people's quality of life and their, their mental health and everything else. So, we do try, naturally people have I guess there's two groups of people. Some people naturally very much trust doctors and dietitians and medical professionals, and some people absolutely don't. Difficult because that's the best advice we can give, really, is to see a doctor and to get the diagnosis and to get proper advice. But yeah, it's difficult.
It is difficult. What about when it comes to sort of extreme dieting? I use the word extreme because I think any type of dieting can be extreme, sort of yo-yo dieting. Would you have any advice from a dietitian's point of view as to ways that people can start to even plan and escape from that?
Yeah, there are some great books now which have been released about diet culture and talking against diet culture and how actually we can. There's something about educating yourself so that you don't fall for some of the myths and the nonsense. But also, there are, as I say, there are some brilliant people who are doing some great work. So there's the health at every size movement, or the intuitive eating type people, and there are some issues with that, in that losing weight in some medical conditions and for some people is really important and valuable and makes a big difference to their long-term health. But those messages about, dispelling with diet culture, not listening to it, listening to your body, trusting your body, those are really important messages. And there are some really good books out now about, talking against diet culture. So I'd encourage people to pick up one of those and have a read and understand what's going on and what they're being sold, because it's a big marketing machine. Plane on the helicopter. Yeah, so there's some good resources now for people to look at. And the first thing that I would encourage anyone to do who's trying to move away from some of that stuff is to unfollow anyone on Instagram who posts things that make you feel less, that make you feel like you ought to be following their diet or doing their diet, their exercise regime to achieve what you're trying to achieve, because just seeing those images every day is poison. And we have to remember that the majority of those people have either photoshopped that picture. It's their job to look that way. It's probably not, certainly not my job to look a certain way or to have a certain body shape. It's my job to use my brain. And for most of us, it's our job to use our brain, not to look a certain way. Things like thigh gaps, and what's the other one? There's thigh gaps, and then there's, I can't remember. There's all these things that diet culture tells us we're supposed to have or not have. And it's just nonsense. Your body, we're all individuals. Most of these things are genetically impossible for most people. So stop following anyone that's using their body to sell you anything, because it's not the right way of going about things.
I think that's great advice. I think social media can be so damaging to, you see all these images. This is how I should look if I want to be happy.
Yeah. And then, people are stood in front of the mirror pinching the bits that are not that picture, that don't fit in with that. People are aiming for things that are completely out of reach. I've done some work recently talking about women having abs. So for some women, having visible abs is their normal, healthy body fat percentage, and that's fine, and they are well. For the majority of women, having visible abs is a sign that actually your body fat percentage is at a level where you're probably not having normal hormonal, you're not producing normal levels of hormones, you're probably suboptimally fertile. And it's not because it's not important if you do or don't want to get pregnant. What's important is that your body works best when it's working best. And when your body fat percentage is so low, the impact of that on estrogen production and things like that is huge. We know that from female athletes. And for the majority of women, having six-pack abs is a very unhealthy way. And lots of young women in particular are aiming for that, and that's what they're looking to achieve. And that's not healthy. That's not health, that's aesthetics. And I think social media has a lot to answer for in terms of encouraging lots of people to try and look like that.
Yeah, me too. When I lost all that weight, I had visible abs, but I didn't have a period for nearly 2 years.
That's an important message. Please keep telling people that. It's so important to highlight that.
I'm so much happier now. Like I can grab a bit of my stomach, and I can grab all sorts of areas. But I tell you something, like I'm so much happier now than I used to be. It's just so different.
I do wonder how, and I'd be interested to hear what you think. Actually, I do wonder how much of that comes with age. So certainly, I have this mission in my life where I feel like I'd love to reach out to as many teenage girls as possible and stop them going through this. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily possible all the time. I think I think there's so much work we can do, particularly with the social media stuff, to educate young women about their bodies and what's right and what's wrong and health and everything. But when I speak to women in their 30s, they're like, oh yeah, I used to do all of that stuff and now I don't anymore. I've let go of it. Yeah. Women in their 40s and 50s as well, when I'm working with them, your relationship with your body changes so much as you get older. I don't know what you think about that, and whether you think we can make a difference when people are younger.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I would say I'm going to be 35 soon, and I'm at a point now where I really do feel like I've made total peace with all of that. I used to obsess about people on Instagram when I was younger, when it first came out, social media, even magazines, like in late high school, and I always remember comparing myself to other people, and when I look back now, I think, oh my God, like now I'm happy if I don't care. And I never honestly thought I would get to that point. And it's a nice feeling, like, do you know what? I am happy being the size I am just now. I do eat healthily, and I'm conscious about health. Like I focus more on my health now, because that's more important to me than anything else, because I've been really, really unhealthy in my life. And I do worry quite a lot about kids growing up. I've got two nieces, they're 3 and 3 months, and they're still really young. But I do think, like, how are they going to feel when they're in their teens? Like, what is the world, like, I sound really old now, what is the world coming to? I'm not sure.
I feel much the same. It's a scary prospect, and I go into schools and do work with young women on body image, and the way that they feel about themselves is just horrendous. And they are obsessed with their eyebrows in a way that
it's really interesting.
I'm too old to get that at all. But it's a shame. I don't know whether that's, I can't really, I remember being that age, and I remember having similar thoughts, not about my eyebrows, but about other things.
Because eyebrows weren't cool when we were at that age, were they? Like, had little to no eyebrows. That was it.
Exactly. It's so weird to me. I understand that it's all part of modern culture. But yeah, I think, we can reach out to people, we can help people to understand, but there is something about that transition into making peace with your body takes time. One of the really important messages, I think, for women to understand is that whilst you may have things about your body that you don't like, everybody has things about their body that other people would want. Does that make sense? So like you might be saying, oh God, I wish I had her thigh gap, but she's probably looking at you thinking, I wish I had her bum. Do you know what I mean? No one's in. If you are comparing yourself, chances are there are a lot of people comparing themselves to you and thinking that there are things about you that they wish they had. My really close friend, who's also a dietitian, is a naturally very, very slim girl. She's just naturally very, very slim, probably a size 6. And but she would probably look at me and think, oh, I wish I had her boobs and I wish I had her curves. And like, no one's ever happy. You have to choose that for yourself, and you just have to make peace. And that's what we did. I think that's what you come to a bit later in life.
Yeah. I think it has taken me until the last couple of years to really think I'm happy with what I eat. If I want to go out and have like a massive slice of cake at the weekend, then I'll do it, and I'm not going to come home and feel guilty about it. I might feel guilty if I'd gone out like and murdered someone or something. Like, that's what we should be feeling guilty about. Well, thank you so much for the chat today. It's been really, really nice. If anyone is interested in finding out more about what you do, is there a way, what would be the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, so all over social media, which is at Sophie Dietitian. Lots of people spell dietitian with a C, but it is spelled with 2 T's. Yeah. So at Sophie Dietitian everywhere. And then my company is City Dietitians, so it's citydietitians.co.uk. What we've done is bring together a group of world-leading dietitians who are real experts in their field, who are writing the research in their fields, and we offer that, them to companies and for one-on-one consultations as consultant dietitians. You can read all about the team on citydietitians.co.uk.
That's great, thank you so much. Just before we go, you mentioned some books earlier that people might be able to pick up. Would you be able to pop me an email with those, and I can put them in the show notes of ones that you recommend?
No problem. The other thing I should have said, actually, when we were talking about IBS and recommendations, is, let me just try and get a soundbite that you can maybe edit in. If you have been diagnosed with IBS or you're having some of those symptoms, the Monash, if you have IBS or you're suffering with any of those symptoms or you've been diagnosed, a really great place to go to for advice is the Monash website. Monash is one of the universities in Australia where they wrote the research, the original research. So all of the recipes on there are reliable. All of their information is really reliable and worth looking at if you think it might be affecting you and there might be something that you could try. Some of the common foods that affect people all the time are things like onion and garlic and apples and pears and broccoli and these things that we include all the time. So actually, if you want to have a little try of cutting some of those things out as a trial, so just for a couple of weeks, see how that impacts on your symptoms, and then go and get some more help if you feel like you're going to have to continue that in the long run. But the Monash website is a really great resource, so I'd really encourage people to use that.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely pleasure. Lovely to speak to you.
I just wanted to say thank you so much again to Sophie, who is an incredible source of knowledge when it comes to all things related to IBS, digestive disorders, and also, like myself, has a very strong view on the effects of long-term yo-yo dieting. So if you would like to find out more about Sophie and about what she does, you can find all the links to her website in the show notes. So just scroll down on the device that you're listening to and click any of the links that are available there. I will be back on Thursday for another episode of the podcast. So until then, thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you're a regular listener and you haven't left a review yet, then don't forget to do that as well. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you on the next episode.